So this is just to show you some stuff that we continue. All our mad research keeps going on, right? So here's one little excerpt from Twitter. This character over here helped us get farmed all the data out. There's more to do, unfortunately. But this is going back to 2010. So it's 3 years, and this is a measure of the positivity of all of the words on these days. So it's at the day level for these languages. So it's anything written in these languages. Aha, Russian is here. So you can tell us what went wrong on these particular days. So Twitter keeps evolving. Right at this point, this is when Indonesian became an official language that you could select and say that you are an Indonesian speaker. We have other ways of detecting language, which actually are pretty effective. So we'll probably do that as well eventually. There's at least 1,000 words used to score each day. And so you'll see, right, we see the same sort of thing in English. So there's that pop for Christmas and New Year's, right? So you see that again, that again. That's not appearing so strongly in Russian. We don't have as much data there. No, but there's also the Eastern Orthodox Church. If there's going to be a big pop for Christmas, it's... Yes, because of the Julian calendar, right? Yes. The Gregorian calendar. Did not adopt. It took England 150 years, and Russia will take an infinite amount of time. No. Well, it's fantastic. It's continued fractions. It's to do with the leap day, right? The thing was going out of phase with Easter was getting messed up. So the scientists and the religious characters of the 1500s or so on, right, talked about it, tried to sort it out, and said, well, it's not just a leap day that we need every 4 years. We need to not have one every 100 years, and then we need to have one every 400 years. Right? So 2000 was the great year. Like this happens every 400 years. It's the exception to the exception to the exception. It looks like a normal leap year, but was in fact a leap year that should not have been a leap year, but then was. And then you're like, it's a leap year. It's just divisible by 4. No, it's divisible by 400. So anyway, that hasn't popped in. But there are some dips here that may or may not be artifacts. The thing about this is these languages are being scored by their own words, right? We're not just translating from English or something. Now we have evaluations of individual words and phrases eventually for these individual languages. So this is a big jump. So you're going to have a different, I'm going to have one of our students is going to speak on Thursday, actually. So this is Jake Williams. He'll show you a bunch of things, but he should put up some nice little piece that he's done for the Olympics. So you can see different countries getting excited. So it's just for the 2-week period of the Olympics. You can see when they win a gold, they get excited. Actually, you can see when Mexico gets a goal against Brazil, that they go up, and Portugal goes down. And you can see that there's a silver, I think, for Korea, where they're very distressed that they got a silver. Because so silver is worse than a bronze. Bronze is great because you're on the podium. Silver is like, you could have had a gold, right? So bronze, you're like, thank God. Fourth is the worst. Fourth is absolutely the worst. Anyway, so you see what we thought might happen. So there's this big spike in sadness around, like some examples of silver. Gold is up. Anyway, so there are a bunch of other things coming along, but this is just using it as a kind of an instrument. Right. So that's just some fun to start with. This is actually, those languages were not on the same scale. So this is to show you, using a certain kind of lens, we throw away some stop words. But Spanish and Portuguese are up the top. This is Brazilian Portuguese, of course, right? This is just an unfiltered, like all the Portuguese from Twitter. You could do other things, but those guys, they're bouncing around up top. And French seems to be the one that's taking a bit of a dive through the whole thing. And French is a mixture of people, of course, from around the world. Spanish, very much so. English as well. Russian is more Russian. Korean is more Korean. Like so, and you can do geotag stuff to then. We have Arabic. This is Arabic. There's not enough data. What's that? Yeah, so it's a bit messy. Again, probably not enough. It's this one. Yeah, I mean, there are enough words in each one, but they're not. Hold on. Korean is actually here. Yeah. Yeah, something horrible seems to happen here. Again, we may have to threshold and put more data in and so on, but we can see what this is. They spike around Christmas. Yeah, they have that as well. But this little bit here is pretty. I mean, it could be North Korea, right? Yeah, I mean, bad things. I have an uncle and aunt who live in Seoul, and it's not great. I mean, the news is tricky. Yes. There's stuff going on all the time, but maybe that was yeah.
So a lot of this is all based on like happiness value of a single word.
Yeah.
Like,
Are you going to ask about context and so on?
right.
Yeah, sure. So there's an enormous amount we can talk about. No, I know what you. It's a very good question. I mean, absolutely. So.
There's a news report, no killings.
Yeah.
Like,
Correct.
no and killings are both negative.
Correct. Yeah. So there are a number of things. One is that we actually noticed that individual words, you can show that they correlate well with the ambient scores for the words and phrases around them. So that's that's just sort of a nice result. So we are taking atoms. We don't want to do, it's hard to do phrases. We now have a method of doing it that builds upon, it's a whole other thing to talk about. But we can't feed sentences. I mean, it would be impossible. It costs a lot of money. It's surprisingly robust. There's lots of tests that you can make. And it fails in a number of ways. We would never evaluate a single sentence. Absolutely not. You don't do that. And we don't evaluate sentences and then aggregate them. We take a whole, so it's more like measuring the temperature of something. And so you'll see some of the molecules are moving faster or slower than the others. And in this case, it's words, right? So Saturday is happier than Tuesday in English tweets. And so there's movie and all this sort of stuff going on, right? Wedding and sports and things. But there's also drunk and hangover, right? There's stuff that's going the other way. So you see that. You can see the negative things, right? Yeah.
So how do you, like, across different papers, like, how do you know whether they used a good model for?
Okay, so, you mean, so not our work, but people's work in general? There's a hugely problematic element is whether they show you the words or not. And they don't. Most people don't. Most people absolutely don't. They can't quite bring themselves to do it. It is messy. It's not an easy thing, but you need to show how your words are. I mean, it's very simple. How are your words contributing to a score? So if you can't see that, then you have to have some doubt. It depends on how the semester goes, but I might give a piece on this later on. Some of you have seen it. Okay, so happy to discuss at length. But it's a tool that works well. It correlates with all sorts of things. It anti-correlates with gun death. It correlates with health scores, say, across the states in the US. So it's surprising for a somewhat crazy measure. All right. So we were into this. We're talking about real distributions of diseases, and I'm giving you this example of Iceland. There's also the Faroe Islands, for which we have this kind of data. And the story was, and you've seen this sort of thing before, that it doesn't look like, well, you've seen this kind of attempt, right? The cumulative, just complementary cumulatives. They seem to have this kind of like a lot of little things that don't take off, and then when it does, it's somewhat unpredictable. It's almost like a uniform distribution. I mean, it's very rough, very, it's hard to get this data, of course. This is some stuff, I'm just going to skip through it. Back to where, okay, so that's this thing about the size. So that's one piece. And then I'll show you what simple models produce. And then there's this aspect of real diseases as well. And of course, yes, very complicated models might produce this, maybe. But it's resurgence. This is actually the time series for SARS. So it's 2002 through 2003. This is as reported, right? So we're missing a lot of data from all sorts of places, China in particular, notably, right? There was trouble with reporting. It looks like there was stuff going on here. But if you're watching this and you're monitoring the world and you've got your fluffy white cat and you're wondering, if maybe you want it to blow up or not, you're in control. Then you're thinking it's not going to, it's petering out, right? But then you're in for a big surprise. So this very much happened in Toronto at a smaller scale where it actually really went away and Toronto said, we're all okay now. And they're like, okay, great. And then about a week later, it's like, it exploded again. So this is a hard thing to get out of very simple models. So do you have to go to a full kitchen sink model? But it's a very important thing to try and capture and to try to understand in a basic way. All right, so we get this slowing of the epidemic. And here's basically the story. Someone moves to a new city, or they're traveling. This is, of course, the example of SARS and many other diseases. With of course, travel as flight and so on. And then you just essentially new groups of people are exposed, and you get this resurgence phenomenon. So these two pieces are something we'd like to capture and absolutely do not capture in normal things. And so somehow we're getting this rare events are starting to really affect these systems. It's a brittleness that you'd like to understand. That's a video we saw before, and I just put it in a different place. All right, so can we do this with a simple model? I mean, right, can we just, and then gain some insight? It's always this case of, and we've talked about this a lot, either you want to be sort of in simple model land, where you know that you've 2 parameters, you can plot the thing, you understand what's going on, you can explain it to someone else pretty easily, or to yourself, which is good. Or you're sort of moving out to the whole, you're modeling flight around an aircraft versus flight around a ball, which you can solve equations for and so on. Okay. You're right, you're modeling people jumping out of planes that just hit each other. Yeah, okay. And survived, right, okay, that was good. Okay, so this is something you get out of a lot of these simple, so this is kind of a stochastic model where it's a network model actually, right? This is kind of weird, right? What am I talking about? Yeah, there was a little bit where we watched a video of 2 planes hitting each other and they were full of skydivers and one plane basically exploded and they all jumped out and survived with GoPro cameras. So
yeah, they had video of the whole
they have video, you can see this later on. I'm not going to show it here, but it really is quite good because they all survived, right? Yeah. Largely. Yeah. Yes.
This is like 2 days ago.
Yes. It's unbelievable. It really is bad. Okay, so this is the sort of thing that can happen. Either it just goes, there's an infection, it just goes and doesn't take off, right? The match sort of business. We'll talk about matches again later on. We're sort of obsessed with those things, metaphorically. Or it spreads everywhere. Or it spreads to some characteristic scale, right? Boom, the whole thing takes off. Yeah? So your forest burns down. Like try. And once it takes off, you can't stop it, it takes off. So there's no in between. We certainly don't have this lots of small guys in this business. Right? And then you have to look at the timescales of these things. Typically, and I'll show you plots later on, typically in simple models, the spreading is just, this is the number of infectives. It's like this, right? Right. This is a number of zombies as a function of time. Eventually it goes down, depending on whether your show gets renewed or not. Then there's kind of surprising resurgence kind of things. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Discovering new pools of people who haven't been infected. Anyway, okay, yeah, but you have to write those stories. Okay, stories. So this is surprising. It includes all of these random network models we've looked at, small world models, the scale-free ones. We think they might have some more interesting behavior on them, but they tend to do exactly the same thing. Once it gets into the giant component of one of these networks, it just takes off. Right, and certainly the simple, the differential equation models from the 1920s, you start off with some finite, some small fraction of an infinite population, because that makes sense, right? And then it takes off. If it takes off, it just, that's it. It doesn't even, there's no way it can't even sort of not take off. All right. So there are a couple of exceptions to this. One is this sort of weird effort to model spreading of disease with forest fire models, which themselves are a made-up model, a completely made-up model. So we'll look at that. And then these really sophisticated, huge models where you have everything in them. And these, I mean, this is just the right thing to do. Just the same thing as modeling flow around an aircraft, where we're going to simulate this whole thing. We're trying to do that at larger and larger scales, really the planet scale. Okay, so this is work that goes back to 1996, and it's a mysterious piece. Of course, it appeared in Nature. And all right, so basically, it's the typical theoretical physics story, the piranha characters, right? So if we'll just use the Ising model or whatever we've used on some that we made up for some other situation, and that was fun to play with, and it has really interesting math. We're going to just put people inside, right? Okay. I mean, you see this over and over again, right? This is opinion formation. It's basically, we use the Ising model, and people can have like up and down. Although we'll say it's the Potts model, which means they can have 7 different or 9 different opinions. Okay, so it's a bit ridiculous. They claim that on 3D and 5D like 3D cubic and 5D cubic lattices, you get a match with the real world exponents. They had the Faroe Islands involved as well. This is where the strongmen come from. I don't know if you've watched ESPN2, Strongest Man in the World competitions. There's usually a Faroe Island guy. Yeah, okay. And Magnus Magnusson. Okay, so it's not my thing. So let's see. So it turns out the original forest fire model, for all it's worth, is not completely understood. There are arguments still in the literature really about whether it's really a power law or it's something that's moving to be not a power law. Really hard work. But this is not what, I mean, social networks are some weird higher dimensional space, for sure. But a 5D network is a bit odd. So let's look at, this is the data I showed you. And I showed you that if you did the binning reasonably, then you got this kind of big spike for small things, and then this sort of flat distribution. Very sneaky thing. And so lots of sneaky things happen with these skewed distributions, right? We've talked about this over and over again. Isn't it a good example? So this is a complementary cumulative, right? The number that have a size greater than some value. And they've binned all of these sizes into 4 points. 1, 2, 3, 4. Binning in log space is really, really dangerous, right? So there's this guy here. This actually, if you don't bin it so much, looks like this. Right? Or some of those things I showed you where you use a much finer bin. Right? That kind of, there is some sort of decay, but this has really changed the whole story. So, oh, this is terrible. Yeah. This is terrible. But, you know, these guys can publish in Nature at will, basically. All right, so that's a bit of a problem. There's a little piece down here which should click, but I've spent about 400 hours in the last 2 days because of the whole font thing. Anyway, and doing some other things. But this is one of the good XKCDs, right? So it's physicists. There you go. Trying to predict the model of complicated system. Just models a simple object, right? That's your Ising model. Then add some secondary terms to account for complications. I just thought, why does your whole field need a whole journal anyway? All right. So liberal arts majors may be annoying sometimes, but there's nothing more obnoxious than a physicist. This really, really does happen all the time. They sort of think they can do anything. Anyway, there's some more. Can you read that? That's pretty bad. Yeah. Just some extra abuse there. All right, good. So that pretty much sums it up. That's good. That's a good representation of what just happened here. Okay. By the way, I'm going to take you through a simple model that gets some of the thing, you know, magically gets out some of these little pieces that we're talking about and shows you some of the weirdness about R0 and this reproduction number, the worth of it, and the scariness of, basically the horrible scariness of things that spread throughout the world. Okay, right, this is going to be bad. And then we'll get to social contagion. It may start next week. It's great, lots of interesting things. All right, so there are a number of other pieces. This is going back in time. I mean, people have suggested, well, let's have at least multi-scale models, right? We'll have some global mixing, some local mixing. That's this kind of work. Longini here is doing that sort of thing. Then really, this is in the 2000s. So this is 2005 or 6. This was published in Nature. And this is one of these big, huge efforts, right? So this is called transims and episims, putting together models of people moving around in cities. The first one they did was Portland, right? I mean, they really could model a zombie apocalypse situation quite well, right? Because they have, but of course they're interested in other things. But they should have done that. So you have census data, so you know where people live roughly, you know what jobs they kind of have, so they simulate the city, right? They let people start moving around. All of this stuff will be added to with data from Twitter and all sorts of other things. It will become more and more sophisticated. We read a paper recently in our reading group looking at people moving around on subways, right? Actually, it was a subway in Singapore, Hong Kong, Singapore. So, because you have cards, right? So you have a card for when you go in and where you come out. So it's a pretty good data set. And so they were able to estimate how often people might accidentally bump into each other, right? So these are common, what was the word? Common strangers? People that you see regularly, but of course not necessarily know in any way, but you just see them on the same car. So they could kind of, this is benchmarking things, trying to figure out, well, how much mixing is there and so on. Like we have access to this data. I mean, everyone said, this is obvious that this happens, right? It's just like, can you measure it and can you quantify things in a useful way? And then, of course, one thing to do is to say, well, let's put this into simulations and see how we might want to change the subway system if there's something going wrong. Can you do it? All right, so Vittoria Kalitza, who does a lot of great work, she's been in Indiana. I think she's back in Italy. So she has a lot of nice work early on, especially showing just how if you drop a bad thing in, somewhere. It's just like the game Pandemic, essentially, and you have airlines and you have flights and you have good data on how many flights there are. How much will this thing spread, right? Forcing my children to play that game. Anyway, so they seem to be doing well. I think they're not trying to let it spread everywhere, which is apparently an alternate way to play that. Anyway, so, and this is Vespignani, who's now at Northeastern, so he has a lot of nice work as well. So this is a simulation you can play with. Look, it has equations in it. It's hard to see, but it's called Gleam, and you can actually try to, destroy the world, right? We'll see what would destroy the world. Okay, so this kind of work is out there. It's complicated, it's messy. There's a lot of stuff underneath the hood. Oh yeah, so we'll have a little connection back to. This is the end of our zombie. Abra is really crucial. The zombie.
Lockdown perimeter! Got movement inside.
Speaking. Wow, 6 hours on the dot.
Yeah, well, practice makes perfect. You the only witness?
I am.
Hey, we got uninfected in here.
How many we talking?
I think it might be all of them.
All right, scenario B. Repeat, scenario B. Let's dose these suckers.
Dose what now?
Going in.
This should be it. Okay, so the point is, things to know, right? If someone says, are you the only one who knows about this? Never say yes, because if you're in a possible storyline, because that always leads to your death. Yeah, right, there was a nice call in there, was practice makes perfect. Right, yeah, scenario B. So if someone says scenario B, they might be referring to that. All right, so that was a little, that completed a little community reference there. Which my children are now processing. It's quite good. All right, the conspiracy theory one, that's really good. That's really quite spectacular. Okay, so let's see. So, all right, so this is all good work, but it's a little hard to generalize from, right? So, you can simulate these things, but maybe it's hard to get it will be sort of the end that we have, right? That we have these incredible simulations that work well repeatedly. I don't know how many years it will take for that to happen, but we begin to trust them because they work well. Although humans are difficult things. We're very predictable in some ways, but okay. So, all right, so I'm gonna run you through a little model, and then we'll move on to social contagion. But it's gonna try and capture some of these aspects, the resurgence piece, prediction, right? So one of these, and the rare story, which goes with resurgence, and the size problem, right? So how big is it going to be? So here's a problem that's sitting right in a lot of these models is they have n to start with, or they just have 0 to 1. Like they say, it's an infinite population, and it's going to be some fraction of the population, which is fine, but then you have to know, fraction times what? Is it Hong Kong? Is it the world? Is it some little part, right? So that's this story. Is it just a neighborhood? And so this is a bit of a problem with these simple models, right? We really need to know the size beforehand. We could start to create a network for that, but that's, then we're getting into our kitchen sink. So let's see what we can get out of this. All right, so you guys have seen this sort of stuff before, right? So people interact in context. We've talked about this. We're going to use this as a motivation, right? We've seen these pieces. And so identity, blah, blah, blah. You've seen all this. This is the small world network story. So there are various ways that people find themselves mixing, and you create a connection between populations. So we're going to use some of this, and I'm going to skip through it. Here's the model. It's a nice influential piece. Roby's back in Indonesia, and Duncan, of course, Microsoft. Okay, so we're going to allow people to move between these contexts that we create in some kind of model, right? And we'll still have an SIR model that's okay, it's fine, but it's a local mixing thing because it's all about random mixing. So that might be okay, certainly in a classroom or maybe in a school, in an elementary school. Although again, some of this nice work that's been done recently is looking exactly at how things spread through schools, very detailed analyses. All right, here are just some of the basics of this simulation. It's discrete time. We'll have an infection probably, so we're trying to tie ourselves to the, the work that exists. You get a recovery probability, and we still have this issue, beta over gamma. And then there's some probability of movement. So we're just making this obvious point that people move around. There won't be quarantine, there won't be any of that. We'll have some movement probability, which will be chosen at random. So sometimes you travel a long way, most of the time you travel a local distance. This C will be some typical distance that people travel. All right, so we can tune that up and down. So these two things. So this, obviously, as you let this thing go to 1, everyone's just mixing all over the place, and it becomes a random mixing model again. If they never move, then it just goes in their little local hermetically sealed villages or whatever it is, and no one else gets sick. Here's one rendition of it, I guess. So you've got little groups, size 8. Again, this hierarchical structure on top. There's some branching ratio of B. There's some depth of the hierarchy. You can play around with all these things. And you know about this sort of story, right? So the distance between neighbors, well, it depends how you want to do it. Usually I said this was 1, 2, 3. So in this case it's 2. Anyway, so that's the basic idea, right? We're going to put them on a hierarchy, let them move around. So what do you get out of this? So it's a very simple thing, but we're just putting some travel structure in there, right? Some movement structure, some just moving away from random mixing in a pretty simple way. And using a hierarchical model it's rough, but it's kind of okay for where we are now with the way transportation works, right? So you can just go to the other side of the world. No good if you're trying to study the Black Plague in whenever it was, 1400s, 1500s, 1600s. Right? It's spreading very nicely across Asia and Europe, just munching people up. Yeah. And there's some people traveling around faster ways, but with horses and so on, but not so much. All right, entering into Monty Python videos and leaving. Okay. Okay, so we have, here's an important quantity, right? So if it starts in some of these little neighborhoods, someone gets sick and they start to get other people sick and so that's happening. Then we want to figure out and we can do this analytically, we want to figure out what's the expected number of people who will move, right? Because they just have a propensity to move. Well, they'll get up and move in that time while it's spreading while they're infected. So they move to a new place, right? So if this number is less than 1, this is a reasonable thing out, it's less than 1, then on average, it's not going to spread, right? People aren't going to get out of their box. So that's a pretty obvious thing. So this is something that's, it's coupled to this R0, which again, the reproduction number. So you drop someone into a perfect random mixing population, what's the expected number of people they infect? How many do they bite and turn into zombies, right? That's hilarious. Okay, so some obvious things. And we do this naturally. We've been doing this. So you could restrict how often people travel, how often they travel, and how far they can travel. Right? So there's extreme quarantine, which says no travel, no distance, right? Obviously. Or you could say, well, you're allowed to travel, but move freely about your country or your county. Like, not allowed to go outside. So psi in this case is the final size. And this is some characteristic distance based on this hierarchy. But you get this kind of typical kind of transition, right? So these are the final sizes. This will come back into, this is the standard deviation, right? So this is a fraction, 0.1 of the whole population. So it's pretty huge. This is 2 standard deviations on each side. So if no one can travel, or the distance they travel is not much, or they stay within their groups essentially, like they have a probability of travel and they're like, okay, I'll just stay here, right? So they do that. The transition to when they're traveling some distance, you end up with these incredibly bad end states, which we'll characterize properly, right? Okay, so that makes sense. This totally makes sense. This also makes sense. Yep, also sensible. So this is the final size is a function of that P0, right? So you have to be seeing at least one of them leave while the thing is spreading through this little population, right? So you've got some little village, and there's a bad thing starts to spread, and then someone says, I'm going to go for a wander, I feel okay, I'm special, right? And then it turns out this one's yelling back here saying nobody's special, but this one walks in and says, hey, I'm special, and it starts to spread here. But if this expected number is less than 1, then it's not going to travel. Okay, so you see this. So And here it's bad. You've got at least 10 people leaving. So this number makes more sense. The other one's harder to intuit. You could kind of, it depends on how hard it is to shut these things down, but there's a suggestion from this that the distance has a larger effect, right? So you could let people travel frequently, but which also should make sense, okay? So that's sort of a simple output. Here's a nice thing. This is kind of this is where it's really scary and bad, right? So this is the final size. This is so you set up your little world and you put a zombie in it and see how far that spreads, or someone with Ebola, and whatever it is, bad disease, let it spread. And so there are a lot. In this case, you can see this is R0 equals 3, R0 equals 12. That's the only difference between these things. So on average, you expect someone to get 12 more people sick in these little groups of typically 100. Here it's only 3. So they're both exponential growth, but this is horrific, right? This is really bad. And these are the kind of numbers people estimate for measles, actually, this sort of number. But we can, what I'll try to say in the end is R0 is just not something to estimate. So we get this kind of flat distribution for certain kinds of little universes we've created, little worlds. And again, the same thing here. So this is dropped there. It is worse. So there's more spreading. So that makes sense. But if you're in one world, right? So half of your population disappeared. Were you in this case or this case, right? It's a hard thing to see exactly where you came from, what the disease, you have to extract the disease behavior from the movement behavior. There's some work on that. Anyway, we can get these kind of flat distributions out, right? These aren't power laws, they aren't exponentials, these are these horrible flat distributions. So once it takes off, you have no idea, right? You should just run to the hills. Zombie attack. Okay. Just like they do. We get these typically, they're similar looking distributions. There is a bigger spike here, it's true, but we get these sort of similar overall outputs. Of course, there's one big outbreak and that's it. These are rare events. And we can certainly get the same kind of size from very different R0s. If your R0 is 3 versus 5 versus 7, that doesn't guarantee anything about the final size. Right? Again, it's just one of these stories where people want to turn a system story into one number so they can compare them. I mean, it would be really easy if we could do that. We tried too much. This is to give you some idea of the course of these things now. So this is the last. So the size has now reached this very unstable, unpredictable situation. And so here's the number of new cases. This is in the standard model where everyone's mixing, right? It's a random mixing model. So I've got a lot of time steps for a reason. This is R0 equals 3. Everyone is special in the end, right? Bad things happen. Yeah? Should we? Okay. It is, yeah, it would be a good irony. Okay, yeah. Just tell us if you, yeah, right. Okay, so it takes off and gone, right? Number of this is new cases, so boom. These are just a couple of examples. They all look like this, right? They're all spiky, messy things because, we have this world that's balkanized, but it has these little bridges between them. So you're seeing this kind of spreading, right? Nasty, nasty, nasty. And, right, you'd think it might be gone here. You're like, okay, good. They're all gone. They're all gone. And then they come running over the hill. Again, the zombies, right. What's that? They get through the fence, yeah. So, or, you think the movies are finished and then they make another one. Okay. This is like, it's done and it's World War Z. It's like, come on. Surely we're done with the zombie trope. Okay. Apparently not. Anyway, so this is a little ridiculous gauge, which I probably spent 20 hours making at the time. It's terribly simple, but it just tells you the final fraction. So not so bad there, pretty bad there. But again, R0 equals 3 in both cases, right? There was nothing. This is just same system, right? We just infected one person at the start and then let it run off stochastically, and you get very different outputs, which is terrifying. Yeah, the total number who were infected, yeah. Yeah, of the whole lot, yeah. And are now whatever R stands for. Recovered, removed, refractory, R zombie. Right. Right. Okay, rampaging zombie. How about that? Okay. So, okay, so we've done a lot with just this is a good thing. This is sort of in the realm of what you might hope to do. It's a game that can get out of hand for sure, but basically, right, the simple multi-scale structure which you could argue about and so on, but it's pretty clear what it is. And some, of course, randomness, which all these other models have had in some way, except for the differential equation ones. We get this resurgence and we get these broad distributions, which is certainly an achievement. They're odd things. You'd think you might get some of that from networks because networks have structure, but no. Maybe in modular networks you might get something. All right, so a few conclusions and then we'll connect into social contagion, which is great actually. So very unpredictable. So this is just be very afraid basically. This is the upshot. We still have SIR, that's the kernel of the thing. It's still driving it. We've just added some structure outside of it. There's nothing about quarantine and travel bans. Obviously you could put that in and talk about how quickly you could damp the thing down if you saw it, right? How early on you might need to see it. But then we're getting a little too carried away about a simple model. The point of this was to sort of show here are a couple of flavors we put in, and here's the output, right? That's the idea. And one of the big upshots is R0 is not a great, right? This thing that people tend to measure after the fact to say about one single outbreak is not a particularly useful thing to talk about. So it doesn't, even if you measure it, you think you believe you have it all together, it's not going to tell you how big, how likely this, this spread was, or how likely any future one will be. And it makes sense. So R0 is summarizing one outbreak, one spreading event. It's got everything involved, right? Cup of tea, price of tea, but it has how people move around in it. And there are definitely some efforts now to do a better job of this, to try and understand it, given you have some way understanding how people move around, to try and a lot of resolution and data about how the thing did spread. Including kind of odd things where people actually figure out from how the disease spreads how people move around, which seems a little perverse. But yeah, that's not quite what we want. All right, so population structure matters. So really, the game pandemic, all this work by our friends in Italy, mainly Vittoria and Vespignani, who's in Boston. They're really looking at what is the real, right? We have geography, and then we have planes, and we have populations. We just have to really quantify how people, understand how people move around these days. Right, this is exactly what happened with SARS. There was a guy who came from Hong Kong and traveled around the world and sneezed on everyone and disaster. Yeah, right, the bad kind, right, okay. Yeah, Johnny Appleseed. Yeah, and gets home, is like, I really have felt sick. Well, there was typhoid Mary as sort of an extraordinary case, which I believe is completely true, right? So it was a woman who had typhoid, who I think was sort of basically fine herself, but infected anyone she came near, and they essentially imprisoned her, or, put her on either Roosevelt Island or something, in New York City. They said, please do not talk to other people. And I found her at some point being a cook somewhere. I just like things sort of famous for, you could look that up. I think that's true. I may be lying. Okay, so yeah, and look, different countries react in different ways. They do. Either they pretend it's not happening, or they clamp everything down. But one of the upshots of some of the studies of actually, of how people move around with planes suggests that you'd have to stop 95% of all air travel to really prevent something from spreading. If given, a certain level of badness of the thing, and economic stuff would just come to a halt, right? I mean, it really is a hard situation. Madagascar wins, yeah. New Zealand maybe too, yeah.
So fly to Madagascar if there's an outbreak.
Yeah, but of course,
Madagascar, you have to take a boat to Madagascar.
Yeah, I would go to somewhere like the Cook Islands or something like that. Or actually, some of those little islands down in the South Atlantic, they're pretty hard to get to, yeah, right? You know, but they're really Norfolk. Yeah, you could get out to Pitcairn Islands. You know, you go on Mutiny on the Bounty sort of thing. Yeah. 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 Well, you've got Easter Island. That's hard to get to. Yeah. That is a problem. Yeah. You take some heater things and take yourself to Antarctica. What's that?
They have a boat where apparently people with quarantine, but
God. Okay. Have not played it. All right, good. You have. All right. Very simple story. You know, if you want to measure things, you have to, it's like measuring the weather. You want to say what the temperature is, the humidity is, if it's raining or not. These things are all good things to report separately rather than say the effective heat index is something, you know. Silly. Okay, so and we have this basic story. You do need a disease that reproduces pretty well. You do need people moving around, interacting in some way. You know, this is the sort of thing we can look at afterwards, right? How important are these rare events? What's in, right? Oh, so this just remains a problem. I mean, we have swine flu starts off, and everyone is worried about it. Right? Avian flu, terrified about it. One of the problems, I think, is that we have certain kinds of farming that lead, right? You have pig and poultry together, and that essentially creates a laboratory for flu. Okay. So let's move on to social contagion. Right? So basically, be very afraid. That's kind of the story. But that's a simple introduction to disease spreading models, the problems with them, because you'll see people just use SIR, they'll just use it. Oh, well, let's just use an SIR model. Really can't, you have to be really careful. And if you go back and look at the literature, this is kind of amazing what people have said. So this is a paper that appeared in Nature, 964. It's really just a thought piece, and it just says, well, look at this SIR model. Let's use it for religion. It's really just like a couple of pages. There's no data or anything. I mean, we could pop it up, but it's just, you know, it should work too. This is how ideas spread. It's pretty bold. Randomly, I went to school with this fellow's son, and this sort of popped up I had no idea these, but spread of rumors, so this builds on this one, same idea. This has been incredibly important in the marketing world, in marketing literature. People in marketing departments in business school, the BAS model has been used forever. You know about this thing? Have you heard of this? Yeah, I mean, it's the thing. And what it is an SI model. And it is a fantastic example of it. I mean, it says explicitly it's from diseases. It's an SI model, and the original paper was looking at the sale of white goods and things, right? TVs and so on. So you have the number of TVs in the US over time, right? Many years. No one has a TV? Everyone has a TV. And then it's like population number is actually here or something like this, right? The magic rectangle number would be great, right? Where is it? Where's my magic rectangle? Yeah, your space phone. I can't lose it. Yeah, magic rectangles, right? World domination. Those guys, crazy. So, but they're looking at fridges, you know, this sort of thing, right? And so this is, in fact, the model underneath that is just an SI model. There's no recovery. Once you get a television, you've got a television. You're infected. You're susceptible, no TV, infected, TV, and that's it. And so you can fit that curve because the formula you get out of it is a sigmoid, right? If you have a sigmoid curve coming out of something, it's going to have three ways to fit it. Basically, there's going to be essentially the start, the end, and something that gets you roughly in the fit. You can fit that to anything. So, and so many growth curves look like this, you know, height of a human, right, or organisms. Kind of, they grow like this. How much money a company makes. I mean, all sorts of things have this thing. Sigmoids, I have a sigmoid. Here is my theory that produces a sigmoid. So lots of ways to get a sigmoid. Lots of ways to get parallel size distributions, right? And we've argued about that. Sigmoids, wow, you can get a sigmoid from all sorts of things. Right, you need some little exponential growth and then something that stops it from growing at the end. Sigmoid. So that's really what's going on with this one. But the big problem is, how do you know what the final size is?
We did it like in population, so there's a number of people that
are
susceptible, and that goes down over time, and the other one goes up,
and that's it, right? But how do you know how far the thing will spread a priori? I mean, you have someone like Krugman in 1997 saying the internet's a kind of a thing, but it's not. It's going to be kind of like fax machines. It's not going to be a big deal. I mean, you can go back and look at what people said about the telegraph or whatever. It's the Twitter. I mean, Twitter's a great example. The people who invented Twitter said that it was ridiculous. Yeah, you can get into this bit and you're not sure if, when's it going to curve over. Yeah, sure. Yeah, you just don't know. But the problem is you can fit something to it after the fact, and you say, I can model these things. If you're here, yeah, that's going to be hard. So no, this is a serious business. Yeah, it's really hard. You can definitely fit it. Lots of other things. This is spread of fanatical behavior, right? You can see this was funded by the Department of Homeland Security probably in 2003. I don't have a cite for this. It's a great paper. I think about half of the citations are to the first author. Anyway, but it's a compartment model, not even a network, but a random mixing story, right? And so you can go from being a normal sort of character to fanatical. You move through these compartments. So this is using SIR, what I'm trying to say here, to study social phenomena in different ways, right? There you go, spread of Feynman diagrams. Betancourt. I mean, I think this is, actually I don't know the details of that one, but people have used it for all sorts of, and we're still arguing about this, right? Do social things spread like diseases? How much? I mean, yes, they do sometimes, right? They have disease-like behavior. So that's what we'll get to. I have a piece at the end here about predicting social catastrophe. And that will connect into, right. So it's been around for a few years. This is before everything fell apart too, which is interesting. So it's Greenspan, and I could show you the video perhaps. So this is 2008. This is Greenspan in the New York Times saying that, this is in front of Congress actually, so maybe put too much faith in the power of free markets. Those of us looked at the self-interest of lending institutions to protect shareholders' equity, myself included, are in a state of shocked disbelief. Waxman said, do you feel that your ideology, which is a bit strong, pushed you to make decisions you had not made? He said, well, I found a flaw. I don't know how significant or permanent it is, but so he doesn't quite say what it is. This is a bit later on. Oh, no, this is earlier. This is actually earlier. This is 2007, that's right. So this is a great set of lines from this guy. I've been dealing with these big models, right, for forecasting. I could run the thing. Oh, well, all right. I've tried to get it set up so I could run this video. It's okay. So if I'm going to figure out a way to determine whether or not, so pretend I'm Greenspan, enough people are more fearful or changing more euphoric, right? So this is all about emotion now. We don't need any of these math models. Bit strong. I could forecast the economy better than any way I know. And the trouble is we can't figure that out. I've been in forecasting business 50 years. I'm no better than I ever was. Nobody else is. Forecasting 50 years ago was as good or bad as it is today, which is a bit, again, strong, a little too strong. Maybe it's having a bad time. And the reason is that human nature hasn't changed, which I'm not sure about that. Line of reasoning, we can't improve ourselves. And this was an interview, so it was actually, you can watch it if you want. You can click on this later. This was his, erudite response. Got himself beeped. But the full interview is really interesting, actually. It talks about regulation and the role of the Fed and so on. It's well done. It's not adversarial or anything. It's quite interesting. I'm not going to click on that. Anyway, even though I made these nice little things. Okay, so this is, we're talking about things that spread and collapse and so on. And prediction, right? I mean, we have a lot of trouble with the disease stories I've just showed. Awful for social phenomena. This is Galbraith, this is the son of Galbraith, the Nobel laureate, right? This is after the whole thing collapsed, right? That whole housing thing collapsed. So I have a joke slide somewhere which likens I put up a giant hot dog and this is a collateralized debt obligation at the top. Because that's what it is, right? It's the food version of such a thing. So collateralized debt obligations taste good, but are full of bad things and will hurt you in the long run. You shouldn't eat too many of them. But we did. We ate a lot of them. We sold them, and Very clever. Same idea, basically. Just stick it into a sausage, fry it up, some herbs and spices. Good. That's, you know, and that's essentially complex financial instrument creation. Very similar. Look what I found on the floor. Let's make it. Let us sell it to some people. All right, so this is strong. You're saying that 2 or 3, right? 10 or 12 would be closer than 2 or 3. What does this say about economics? It's an enormous blot on the reputation of the profession. None of these guys went to jail, not like the Italians for the earthquake thing. There are thousands of economists. Most of them teach a theoretical framework that has been shown to be fundamentally useless. This guy is an economist. He's an economist. So.
Greenspan just came out with a book about this.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, he was actually, yeah.
I think he was on the Daily Show again.
He was, yeah. That's right. Right.
Did a 60 Minutes, did a good profile of the whole thing.
Right. I'm sure that's an interesting book to read.
But it's the whole, like, didn't account for behavior.
Right. Which turns out to matter, yeah. So it's definitely hard work. And I'm not saying it's not. Okay. Did I have? Okay, so that's good. So that leads us into this next situation, which is trying to, you know, we're going to model some. Let's get this guy here. We're going to model some simple. Oh, I know what I did. Nope. Oh, it's at the bottom of the other one. Okay, good. All right. Okay, good. Okay. The end of these slides will have the collapse of the giant empires of Europe. Okay, right. Which is another presumably unforeseen event earlier on. Okay. Social contagion. Okay, let's try it out. So again, we're going to get at simple models, right? You can model it to the nth degree, and we'll have to keep trying to do that, kitchen sink type models, but we need to understand basic simple ones. So I'll give you some of the simple fundamental ones that move a good distance away from a disease-like one. So we have the SIR one, which is this what I'll call independent interaction. So you're just bumping into someone, either you become a zombie or not, right? This is sort of a, yeah. And then if you run away, there's essentially just, you know, that's forgotten, although not psychologically. But, you know, like your zombie propensity is gone. You don't have sort of a zombie dose in you, or you don't have a dose of, this is how the models work. This doesn't mean this is really what happens. I don't want to confuse you of how you should behave in a zombie attack. But, you know, if someone sneezes on you, and you may or may not get a cold sort of situation. But if you don't, the idea is that essentially you have another chance later on, right? Now, of course, as an immune response, the thing that can happen is it goes the other way. With social behavior, you're exposed to something, and this is, of course, how marketers want to do it, or educators, you say the same thing over and over again. The integral of x is, right, blah, 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 blah. I can't remember. And, okay. So we have a different thing, which is, you know, it can go both ways, right? You're exposed to it again and again and again, and then finally, okay, I will buy those things. I now have Crocs. I have Crocs. What's that? And you still have some kind of behavior like that. I will never wear those things. Like, I also hate you for wearing them. You know, like, you know, people have much more complicated possible behaviors. But for disease, there are some diseases that kind of do build up, where you do build up doses. And there are certainly biological behaviors or processes which aren't necessarily contagious. It's like you know, bee stings, for example, right? Allergies, where you build up a dose, and so the next bee sting can be very bad because you do have a memory in your system. So what we're talking about is simply memory of different kinds, right? Is this amusing?
No.
Wrong? Okay. These guys are involved again? Okay. All right, so we're going to have these pieces of a bit of background where I find myself monologuing. Granovetter's model, so Granovetter we've mentioned before. Everyone in physics and computer science loves citing Granovetter, sort of the go-to character. He's done some beautiful things in the 70s, and one of them is this really interesting things. One was the weak tie story, right? So that you find your way around the social universe, or you do well in the social universe by harnessing these weak ties, and that was about job search, but it sort of has expanded and keeps being told that story again, or found again and again. And then, so it's the strength of weak ties, great title. And this will be about thresholds. So the idea that 3 out of your 10 friends do something, and you're like, okay, I'm joining the team because we're humans. Okay, so this is a fun thing. Maybe you've seen this. There's a link to the article that so we'll have this for boys and girls. So nicely done. So this is just a little example of some social contagion. I mean, just absurd social contagion, really. So this is the most common name in each state, right? And the one that's dominating the whole of the states in terms of just sheer number of states is colored. The other ones are in grayscale. So you can just, it pops out a little more. So there's a GIF you can see, an animated GIF that goes round and round and round. A little bit of convert image magic. You can break it into pieces, which is nice. Yeah, little command line. So it only took me an hour. Anyway, so so I've broken it into pieces. Okay, so this is 1960. So David will be the winning character here. So Michael starts to pop in. I don't know. Well, maybe that's interesting. Maybe that's the overall. Maybe this is overall and this is population because New York State. No, I don't know. I'm not sure what that bottom bit is. Anyway, you can see the thing. So Michael's starting to take over. Michael is starting to win. David fights back. There's a bit of James going on down here. I mean, Michael, there are Michael clubs, right? I think there's just so many Michaels that. This is 70s. We'll have the girls are great too. So Jason, this is Canada is invading with Jason. But Michael is just fantastic. It's like, I don't know, call him Michael. This is actually, naming kids is tricky, right? Well, so this is the thing. Naming kids is very tricky. There's great data on it because we have census data. And there's all sorts of things. So this, before a lot of the data that we have now, this has been a thing that people have explored a lot for understanding cultural evolution. Right? It's a very simple thing. I mean, how do you name your kids? Joshua pops in. Which one?
Justin popped
Hey, yeah. It's that Justin up there that we cover. Chris is still holding on down there. Tyler is, look at this. This is good. And the contiguous parts are great. 94, Jacob pops up. There's a Daniel happening. California has just said, thank you. So that matters. This is Jose. So this is 96.
There's some diversification of the
So that's what, and that is the overall story. You'll see that incredibly strongly for girls, actually. So Jose is just winning. And it's just like, so the great thing about people is we think we're independent. That's what makes us powerful, right? But what makes us extra powerful is while we're thinking that, we're copying each other. And so we move in huge groups. Jacob just went berserk, and so this is, I can't read that. Can you read that?
Anthony.
Yeah, thank you. All right, and William has a little fight back down there. This is totally fun. Jose now in Arizona, which is interesting. Angel, which is, again, Spanish, right? 2007. Ethan. I thought it was Eitan, actually.
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking like, oh, that's totally a person.
Okay, so that's it. It goes up. No, this is 2012. Oh, Mason. Oh, yeah. Gaboosh.
Oh, no. Don't do it.
Let's not say anything bad. Which one? Liam Neeson? Yeah, maybe they watched Taken. And they're like, that was a great movie.
His wife died in she died in ski accident.
Oh. I don't know. But this is a much, what happens is you hear the name and you think, that's a nice name. But the fact that you've heard the name means it's everywhere, right?
We Kardashians.
Probably. I'm sure. Well, there's a diffusion in that way too, right? So there are lots of Britneys now, and there are lots of, okay, let's watch, we'll go through this one. Mary, Brenda has a 5 eggs from Lori, Lisa starts to take over. So the girls are different. Girls are very interesting. So
That actually fits my aunt really well.
so Michelle, there's Angela and Kimberly. You guys can totally look at this later. So this is interesting. Look at this. There's Jennifer here, right? In Utah. But then, boom,
Wait, was that 1 year?
boom. Yes, they're all 1 year difference. Boom. These guys are holding out, right? This is Mississippi. And that's it. So this is the 70s. This is the 70s. And so Appalachia tries to, oh, it's Mississippi as well. But they're like, "Argh, let's do a little bit of fighting. Ashley gets a go. And then, but this is just incredible. It's just bang. They're sort of flashing back and forth a little bit there. And then, now it's different. How do you feel? We are all different.
So much averaging going on.
What's that? Well, I think that, well, there is, yeah. There's that, and there's also just the fact that there are more. Although, look at this.
I wouldn't necessarily call that like a very different.
Isabella. So this, which can, right? I mean, that's Spanish, yeah? Yeah? Isabella, yeah? Yeah, so this is, but Isabella is, you know, universal, right? So, and Ava. Okay, so there we are, Sophia. I have a Sophie. What's that?
Because people spell their names a little differently. Actually,
Yeah, that's true. So you just have to go down to the 1,000th name, and in that list, you'll see all sorts of variants of the most common ones. They'll be separate. They'll be separate. They'll be separate. You don't have to go very far, and you're like, wow, that's just a Brittany spelt with like an X and 3 T's and something.
Yeah. But for this,
to differentiate, right?
they differentiate it.
What's
I
that?
would say that there's a lot more like differences in like how
Yeah, they
people
do,
say
yeah.
Isabella though than how they say Ashley too.
Yeah,
Like,
no,
I
it's
know
true. But they,
Lisa's and I know Izzy's.
well, there's how it's, what's the given name and then what you do, right? Elizabeth is sort of the great name for that, because you can do pretty much Betty, Liza, Eliza.
Sister Lisa and everybody always like when we were kids was always like, oh, is that short for Elizabeth? And she was like,
Please stop it. Right. But it's where it comes from. Yeah, it's derivative. Yeah, right. Okay, so there's some more stuff. All right, so BuzzFeed is a big deal now, and this is how it started. So, so Jonah Peretti is one of the characters behind this, and I know him a little bit, but he went through the MIT Media Lab, and his claim to fame was spreading a story about Nike. So he tried to get sweatshop written on the side of his shoes, right? Because Nike, you could buy a pair of shoes online and put your name on the side, or anything you wanted written on the side. And he put in sweatshop into the little box. So he got this thing back, was kind of loyally saying, you know, we don't, there's certain words, but we don't, you know, and then he wrote back, and there's this back and forth with like a legal department about whether he could use, because it wasn't a profanity and so on. And could he have a space or something? And then it just ends up with this long sort of thing, and this is maybe 95, whatever. And he sends it to some friends, like ha ha ha. And it spread all around the world, right? And he kept getting, you know, pings from people. You know, when it spreads all over the place, people from Antarctica, space station, and aircraft carriers. That's when you know, if they start contacting you, then it's really everywhere. So, and he was of the mind that, oh, this is easy to do, right? But it's very hard. So, but in the end, after much kind of work, I mean, and he's part of Huffington Post as well, I guess. This is the setup. So these are these categories of things that spread well, and they're easy things to spread. They're jokes, essentially, right? So jokes will spread well because they have this aspect, which is you hear one, if it's funny or it's whatever, you will pass it on, and that becomes the great power. This may not last forever at all, right? This thing, but it's certainly been having a good day, and this is the other thing that spreads well. News. So they've started their own news service over the last few years. You know, they have real writing. Okay, so they have, see, cute things like this. This is their fail page, right? They're really into the little spreading thing. Here I am repeating it. Lolcats, this sort of stuff, right? This is the stuff that spreads easily. Some things stick, right? That tattoos, of course, have spread tremendously. This fits into these three categories, right? This is, of course, when I was a kid. Okay, so you know lots of things that spread. You're part of it, right? Okay. Here we go. This is why it works so well. Look at these people, glassy-eyed automatons going about their daily lives, never stopping to look around and think. I'm the only conscious human in a world of sheep. Okay, so this is my colleague Duncan Watts. I'm going to see him on Friday at Microsoft Research. So he has a pair of Puma shoes on here, which were really, these things spread in when I was in New York. This is maybe 2002 or 3. His point, I saw him wearing them. I'm like, look at this. What are you doing? And he said that someone had forced him to buy them, and that was the end of the fad, right? Because it just happened. Everyone started to think, well, these are cool shoes, and they just spread everywhere. Apple, right, the iPods, when they took off, suddenly there were these white headphones everywhere. So that was a real signaling thing. There were these various things, things spread all the time. These were pretty good examples. This was the end of that one. So lots of things spread, right? Smoking, obesity. These are very controversial pieces, and I'll mention them again. I mentioned iPods. We had the segregation story, which was the shelling model. That's a bad thing. Good things spread, bad things spread. People leaving lectures spreads. So kinds of contagion that we might look at. There's a SIR type contagion, right? You're susceptible, become infected, maybe you stop doing it, right? So you enter into Scientology and then you stop doing it. This is where you enter into some cult, you stop doing it, you enter into another cult, right? This is you go around, right? You have a thing, yeah. So, which could be dieting, it could be going to see horror movies, something. You can have that a cyclic kind of thing, but it's more about categories. Okay, diet. All right, lots of things spread. But this is controversial. We'll come to it. This is just a little example.
When you invite your friends to Hulu Plus, you can earn up to 1 year free. Here's how it works. You invite your friends to sign up, and when they do, you both get 2 weeks free. The more people you invite, the more free Hulu Plus you get. So start inviting your friends today.
So that's an R0 = 3 situation, right? Right. Infect 3 other people. And you can see this happens. There's actually another one, I guess.
I told 2 friends about Fabergé organic shampoo with pure wheat germ oil and honey, and they told 2 friends, and so on. Hey, that's not Fabergé organic shampoo. It isn't? It's an imitator. They're not all the same, so be sure it's Fabergé.
For super body, super shine, and super fresh smelling hair, get the one and only Fabergé organic shampoo.
You'll tell 2 friends, and they'll tell 2 friends. Now you got it. And so on, and so on, and so on.
Fabergé organic shampoo and conditioner with pure wheat germ oil and honey.
Classic. It's Farrah Fawcett. It's Farrah Fawcett, right? Okay, so this kind of thing you'll see over and over again, right? They're trying to make the thing spread. I mean, it is funny to watch ads. We'll talk about this a little more. It's very interesting to watch ads and see which string they're trying to pull on you, or how many kinds of strings. Right, but this is, of course, what they want. But it's just terrible. They want you to think that, she did this and they did this, and you can be like those people, right? You should do the same thing, and then you'll be like that person. But that's not true. Anyway. All right, just some more examples here. So there's a whole body of work now by Christakis and Fowler. It's on based on the Framingham Heart Study. It's definitely, I think it's fair to say it's controversial, right? There's books. People have been on Stephen Colbert. There's all sorts of things that happen. Which is, there's the Nobels, and then there's being on Stephen Colbert, right? So, okay, so the Framingham Heart Study set up to study people's health and to track people through their lives and their families, right? To see how things are connected to genes and behavior and so on. And it was never set up to study social connections, which more and more, the NIH has just put out a big call to study social phenomena, for example, right? So that's now. This is a very old study. The idea was you'd probably have your family listed in the study, and from what I understand, you're asked to then point to maybe one other friend who might be in the study as someone who could help you for retainment purposes, right? So 5 years later, they're trying to find you, they can't find you. Here's some, your family's not contactable. Here's just an extra anchor they could try to connect to you with. So these guys use this information to back out a social network later on. So if someone, from what I understand, if someone nominates this way and someone nominates this way, then that's a suggestion of a pretty strong tie. The complication, there are 2 complications. One is that, well, there's a real social network, and it may be that when you think that here's this person A, B, C, and D, this person looks like they're 3 steps away. A and D look like they're 3 steps away. But if you've subsampled this network, which you are when you're only asking for just a little bit of information about a strong type, but not all the whole thing, then this link could exist. So there's a lot of work saying that things, if this person makes money, gets a $10,000 raise, then that makes this person happy. Like it spreads out through the social network. We've talked about how social networks, your universe is really only 3 steps away. Like that's the extent of your universe. After that, you sort of enter randomness. So there are a lot of claims like this. It remains, as I said, controversial. It's having a lot of impact, I think, because, for instance, so the spread of spreading is the spread of obesity. Okay, right? So the idea is that, and we talked about that friends who get kind of large together, right? And that is, it's also happiness, loneliness, I think divorce. Here's the book. And I've said the controversy. So there's a big write-up about it in the New York Times. This is from 2009, right? Are your friends making you fat? That's the title. It's a long piece. I think Duncan's quoted in this one. And again, the obvious thing to do is to somehow, and this is what people wrote up, stop being friends with them. Or it's really a bad story. Okay, there's this. This is a Slate piece. Everything is contagious. So where they talk about how some other studies show using similar analyses, and this is not quite right, but that height is contagious, for example, amongst teenagers. And so there are certain data sets which they didn't use. There are certain data sets, if you analyze them in a way that's, that you will show that you will get the result that height is contagious. Okay, so there's a lot more to it. It's very messy data, as I've kind of suggested. It's hard to see if something is contagion or if it's simply that people who are similar to each other have now become friends, homophily. That's really, the fellow Shalizi, I've pointed to him a few times. He has a piece with maybe 1 or 2 others calling this into question, so he's a statistician. Very, very, very tricky problem. I guess I'm trying to show you that there's a lot that's exploded in the last 10 to 15 years in terms of quantifying social contagion, strong claims about it. We will eventually get to some fun models and so on, and that's this stuff. So let me just tell you the start. We'll have, if you like, a media saturation story, right? So everyone sees the same thing. And then word of mouth, right? Which is that's how things really I will say deeply spread, right? It's average people telling each other about it, right? Oprah likes the book, but you really like the book and you tell your friend you really like the book. And you don't have to tell them that Oprah told you to read the book, right? So these are tough things. We're going to talk about influence in general. This remains, everyone thinks they can or do this or claims they can. There's a lot of special source stuff out there. So who is actually influencing whom? This has been around for a long time, this problem. The problem of measuring it. There's certainly been good efforts in the 50s trying to do this. Of course, survey type stuff. How do people's influence response functions? So if you're getting some dose from others, you're seeing other people doing something. If 3 of your 10 friends wear Uggs, do you start wearing Uggs? Is it 5 or is it some kind of gradual thing? The Ugg thing is a disaster, by the way. I'm from Australia. Uggs are from Australia. You should not wear them outside. Anyway, so anyway, it's all right. It's okay. Different countries. This is a big question, right? Because if this is true, then this is great. And this has been going on for 50, 60, 70 years. People do it in all sorts of fields, medical fields, whatever. You try and find the so-called super influentials or just the influentials. You pay them lots of money to be a shill for you. And then the story is that they will go and spread to lots of people. So we'll really dig into how this works. And and of course our Gladwell friend is behind a lot of this, right? So tipping point. This is all madness. Connectors would be the thing, perhaps. And the idea of opinion leaders is a very infectious one, and we'll get into why that is. Why do we love the idea of it? Well, A, there's money, if we can get it to work. But B, more deeply, it's something we can understand. We're not very good at understanding groups. We understand ourselves. Okay, so I'll explain this next Tuesday. So Jake Williams will be here on Thursday. Cheerio. Cheerio. All right, thank you, people. Yes.